This is Wayne Eberly, the pastor of the Dunn's Corners Church. Welcome for what is our worship service on Sunday, June 28th, where our congregation has been asked to participate in a Sunday where we preach against racism. Today I'm reading a passage where one woman says to another, a daughter-in-law says to her mother-in-law, "Where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. On June 10th of 2020, just a few weeks ago, NASCAR, National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing, issued the following statement. The presence of the Confederate flag at NASCAR events runs contrary to our commitment to providing a welcoming and inclusive environment for all our fans, our competitors, and our industry. Bringing people together around a love for racing and the community that it creates is what makes our fans and sports special. The display of the Confederate flag will be prohibited from all NASCAR events and properties. In a related statement this past week, they said, "As we have stated unequivocally, there is no place for racism in NASCAR." NASCAR is working to change the narrative about who they are. Whatever their narrative was in the past, now they want it known there is no place for racism in NASCAR. What is our narrative? I would hope our narrative as a church, as a body of believers, as people who call ourselves brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ, I hope our narrative would be one that clearly denounces racism. But just so that it's clear, I want to say, in no uncertain terms, just as NASCAR did, there is no place for racism in our church. And yet simply saying that is not enough, is it? As human beings, we all carry with us things from our upbringing, things from our past, personal experiences, including prejudices, and these things shape our view of the world, our view of other people, and in particular, other people who are different from us. We all have a certain narrative, a story we're living. What a powerful opportunity we've been given at this point in the life of our nation. It's a painful opportunity, but it is a powerful opportunity to change our narrative. The Bible does not leave us on our own to figure out how to change a narrative. Instead, the Bible gives us what I find to be a truly amazing example of how a narrative can change. Today, we're going to explore a narrative. It never mentions the words black, brown, or white. It's a narrative that never mentions the color of a person's skin. But this is a narrative about deep-seated animosity and prejudice. And it is a narrative that changes, just as I believe we are called to be part of a narrative that changes. The narrative involves two groups of people. One of the groups of people are the Israelites. You know the Israelites. The other group is the Moabites. You might not know as much about the Moabites. Genesis 19 gives the biblical origin of the Moabites. In the shadow of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Lot and his two daughters escaped to a remote place. The daughters realize in this remote place they have no hope of having children. There are no men around. They concoct a plan for their father to get drunk, and the daughters take turns sleeping with him. The older daughter, we're told in Genesis 19:37, had a son, and she named him Moab. He is the father of the Moabites today. With roots like that, you can see how the Israelites were almost trained to look down on the Moabites. And then when I tell you some of the history between the Israelites and the Moabites, you'll understand even more. Judges chapter 11, the kings of Edom and Moab refused to let the Israelites pass through. They're referring back to the Exodus story. Moab wouldn't let Israel pass through. Deuteronomy chapter 23 tells us no Moabite may enter the assembly of the Lord to the 10th generation. That is deep-seated animosity. Why? Because when Israel needed food and water on their journey, Moab would not supply them. And the narrative is clear. Moab did not welcome the Israelites. And then on top of that, it's the king of Moab who hires Balaam to put a curse upon Israel. Moab went out of their way to try to curse Israel. That's the prevailing narrative. Moab is no good. But that narrative will change. It's interesting to note, and it's telling about us as human beings. The narrative does not change because some wise, level-headed, mature Israelite proposed that maybe we've been too hard on the Moabites. Maybe we've treated them wrong. Maybe we should let them out of the box. Maybe we should give them a second chance. No, the narrative does not change because of some wise and mature Israelite. The narrative changes because there is a crisis. And it's the crisis that causes a change. Israel is literally forced to change their narrative. The catalyst for change is a famine. The catalyst for change is a crisis. A family living in Bethlehem. You recognize that name, don't you? A family living in Bethlehem is caught up in the famine. In desperation, they leave Bethlehem. They go in search of a place where they can survive, where they can have enough food, where they can be safe, until the situation in Bethlehem improves and they can return. The place they go to find refuge in this time of famine is Moab. We are not told in a direct way why the family went to Moab. The choice of Moab as a place of refuge, it's not just a surprise. It's not just startling. That Moab would be a place of refuge is shocking. We've just heard this narrative of Moab. They don't provide Israel with shelter. They don't welcome them. They want to curse them. And yet when the family leaves Bethlehem, they go to Moab to find refuge and relief. The Bible doesn't tell us directly why the family sought refuge in Moab. But the preceding story gives us a big hint. When we encounter this tale of a family fleeing Bethlehem because of a famine, we've just finished reading the book of Judges. Judges ends with a horrible event. A man and his concubine leave Bethlehem, and they're looking for a safe place to stop. They stop in another town of Israel. They seek shelter from another tribe in Israel. These are their kinfolk, their people, their relatives, their race, and their origin. But in that town that was home to their kinfolk, the man and his concubine experience a terrible fate. The concubine is brutally attacked, raped, and murdered. That's the story that brings Judges to an end, and it finishes with this ominous remark that in those days everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Now the story we have entered, the story of a family in Bethlehem who are forced by famine to leave and seek refuge, begins with these words that call Judges to mind. In the days when the judges judged. That's how the story begins. They were really saying, in those days when everyone did what was right in their own eyes, They were really saying, in a time of chaos and brutality, where one tribe of Israel brutally raped and murdered the daughter of another tribe of Israel, a family faced a huge crisis, and they needed somewhere they could turn for help. Knowing what just happened to another family who left Bethlehem and sought refuge in an Israelite town, do you think they would make the same mistake? This family did not. This family we find in the book of Ruth went to Moab to find refuge. The crisis was so severe, the culture of Israel so toxic, this vulnerable family did the unthinkable. They went to Moab to find refuge. And because they went to Moab, and because of the refuge they not only sought, but they received, the narrative changes. Naomi was the matriarch of the family that left Bethlehem in search of refuge. Naomi went to Moab with her husband and 2 sons. The Bible gives Moab a second chance. This time when Israel comes knocking, Moab opens their door. This time when Israel comes, Moab opens their borders. This time when Israel comes seeking refuge, Moab welcomes them. Moab opens their borders and welcomes refugees. Not only do they do that, but the 2 sons of Naomi take wives from the Moabites. The Moabites give their daughters in marriage. They become part of Israel's family. At this point in the story, unfortunately, something terrible happens in addition to all. Naomi's husband dies. Her 2 sons die. All she is left with are her 2 daughters-in-law, the Moabite woman, one named Orpah, one named Ruth. Naomi is so empty and defeated. In bitterness, she says, I wish my name was bitter. Don't call me Naomi, call me Mara. Mara means bitter. Crushed by the cruelty of life, Naomi decides to go back to Bethlehem. But her return to Bethlehem provides the Moabites a chance to change their narrative, to start a new narrative. Naomi's preparing to go back, and her daughter-in-law, Ruth, speaks to her mother-in-law words that not only blessed Naomi, but words that have continued to bless countless people from countless places all over this world. Naomi's daughter-in-law, Ruth, speaks to her and says, where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die. I will be buried there. May God deal with me ever so severely, if anything but death separates us. Now Moab has not simply opened their borders. Ruth, a Moabite woman, has given her life into the hands of an Israelite. Where you go, I will go. Your God will be my God. Where you die, I will die. Oh my goodness. Once the narrative was that Israel and Moab were mortal enemies, divided by race and a history of animosity. Now a new narrative is formed, and the Moabite models faithfulness, sacrificial giving, and sacrificial living. This compelling narrative now brings new life to Bethlehem. Now in Bethlehem, a person of power steps up, and he models righteous living. The man is Boaz. Boaz owns a field. Boaz sees Ruth, a foreigner, working in his field, gathering the leftover grain, and he realizes that as a single woman, she's vulnerable. He realizes that as an alien, a person from Moab, she's particularly vulnerable. Noticing her vulnerability, the vulnerability of a woman, Boaz protects and provides for her. Do you see now, not only does the narrative of Moab change, Israel has a chance to change their narrative. Before we met Ruth, a family traveling in Israel was liable to be raped and killed. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. But as the narrative changes, Bethlehem, because of Boaz, because of Ruth, Bethlehem becomes a place of refuge, a place of peace, a place of protection. And as Moab gave their daughters in marriage to the Israelites, now the Israelite Boaz takes Ruth as his wife. I could go on and on in this narrative for Bethlehem, this new narrative. In this new narrative, Bethlehem becomes a place of divine revelation of the deepest order. It is in Bethlehem that God says about that littlest son of Jesse, the shepherd boy named David, God says, I do not look at the things man looks at. Man looks at the outward appearance. I look at the heart. What does racism do? Racism looks at the outward appearance, the color of skin. In Bethlehem, God says, I do not look at the outward appearance. There's a new narrative, and Bethlehem is calling us to join that new narrative, not to look at the outward appearance of others, the color of a person's skin, but to join God in looking at a person's heart. Micah the prophet specifically mentions Bethlehem as the place where the God will raise up a ruler. We can rightly take the promises and the prophetic challenges of Micah and tie them to Bethlehem. Micah envisioned a mountain of the Lord where God will settle disputes among nations. Resolution, forgiveness, reconciliation, disputes that are settled so firmly and so finally that you can take your swords and beat them into plowshares. You won't need weapons anymore. Joined to that great promise is a prophetic call to live into the new narrative God is giving us, where the Lord requires of his people that we do justice, that we love mercy, and that we walk humbly with our God. I could go on and on about the new narrative in Bethlehem. But let me just say this. Jesus. Jesus is born in that little town of Bethlehem. In Matthew, the birth of Jesus is linked to the line and the lineage of David. And through a long and lengthy genealogy, Matthew carefully, meticulously lists each name in the genealogy of Jesus. And one of those names is a grandmother from way back, a great grandmother of Jesus. Her name is Ruth. I hope you'll agree with me. Ruth literally is a great grandmother, maybe even the best. Matthew could have easily and conveniently skipped over the little town of Bethlehem, skipped over that little woman from Moabite, the dreaded Moabite, the hated Moabite. Matthew could have skipped over Ruth, but he doesn't. He does not skip over Ruth, the Moabite woman. Matthew names Ruth in the genealogy of Jesus. When God became Emmanuel, the God with us, he had the blood of the Moabites in him. On a Sunday when area clergy have been called to preach about racism, I not only want to preach against racism, I want to preach about the new narrative we're called to make our own. During the coronavirus, I read 2 books about Winston Churchill, books that chronicled the darkest days of World War II. England was standing alone against the Nazi war machine. Churchill and England were desperately hoping the United States would throw their support and join. FDR sent his trusted aide, Harry Hopkins, to survey the situation in England. Hopkins saw the fierce fight and the dogged determination of the Brits, preparing to go home with his report that he would give to the President of the United States that would shape the response of our nation for World War II. Harry Hopkins chose some words from a Moabite to express how he felt. The woman was named Ruth, and he was talking in England, so I guess it makes sense that he used the King James Version. Harry Hopkins said to the people of England, "Whither thou goest, I will go." And those who were there said Churchill's eyes filled with tears. When Julie and I were engaged, she showed me the invitation she wanted to use for our wedding. The passage on the front of the invitation came straight from the Bible, and more importantly today, straight from the book of Ruth. Straight from the mouth of a Moabite woman who said to an Israelite woman, "Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people will be my people. Your God will be my God." And with those words, our life found a new narrative. Speaking on behalf of our church, because I believe I know the heart of our church, I make this commitment to all people of all colors, from all corners and all countries of the world, from all cities and counties near and far, that the Dunn's Corners Community Church Presbyterian has a special fondness for a Moabite woman named Ruth. And I want to say, and I believe we all want to say, to any person who crosses our path on this way of life, any person of any color, every person of every color, we want to say as followers of Jesus, we are with you. Where you go, we will go. Where you lodge, we will lodge. Your people are our people. And our God is the same God, the God who does not look at outward appearances. Our God looks deep within and sees the heart of other people. That's the God that we worship. And if there's any doubt about how God feels about all people of this world, let us never forget, for God so loved the world, the whole world, the entire world, and all the people of this world. God loved the world so much he gave his one and only Son, Jesus Christ, that whoever believes in him would not perish but have eternal life. Amen.